Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready to dive into another episode. I'm excited for this one. We're tackling something that I know a lot of you struggle with, and honestly, I've been there too. It's about speaking English confidently, like really confidently. And to help us break it all down, we're taking a deep dive into a fantastic episode of the Fluent Conversations podcast. They had this fluency expert, Emma Collins, on. She had some seriously insightful stuff to say.
You know, what really stood out to me was how they zeroed in on the fear of making mistakes. I mean, let's be real, that's like the biggest thing holding us back, right?
Totally. Like, it's so universal, whether you're learning a new language or, just trying something new in general.
Exactly. And the way they connected it to like overthinking, that was mind-blowing. They talked about how this fear of being judged, of messing up, it just feeds that overthinking monster in our heads.
It's so true. I remember when I was a kid learning my first language, I wasn't even thinking about grammar rules. I was just like blurting out whatever I could to get my point across.
Right. It was all about pure communication, no filters. And Emma Collins, she actually encourages learners to, get this, make mistakes on purpose. Like, even laugh at yourself when you slip up. It's about shifting that focus from perfection to just expressing yourself.
Yeah, totally. It's like, imagine trying to learn to ride a bike, but being absolutely terrified of falling. You'd never even get on the bike.
Exactly. You have to embrace those stumbles to actually find your balance and, get going.
And that's basically their whole message, right? Like, think less, speak more. Start simple, nail the core message, and then build from there.
Totally. And one of the coolest things they talked about was this concept of chunking. It's basically about learning phrases instead of getting bogged down with individual words.
So, like, instead of trying to construct, like, I would like a cup of coffee, please, you could just go with, can I get a coffee? Way smoother.
So much smoother. And, think about it. It reduces that cognitive overload, which is why we tend to freeze up mid-sentence.
Makes total sense. They also talked about, like, the importance of thinking directly in English, like not translating in your head all the time. And they had this cool technique called narrate your day.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. Basically, you just talk yourself through your day. Even if it's just like, okay, I'm brushing my teeth now, or I'm walking to the store.
That's like building that mental muscle, right?
Yeah.
So you're not constantly switching back and forth between languages in your head.
Exactly. That's how fluency starts to feel like way more natural.
Okay, so let's get into some of the practical exercises they recommend. They had this one called the 1-minute speaking challenge, which sounds pretty intense.
It's not as bad as it sounds. Basically, you just pick any topic and talk about it for a full minute without stopping. It's all about pushing past those initial hesitations and just getting the words flowing.
I love that it takes the pressure off of being perfect. It's like, just go for it.
Yeah.
They also talked about shadowing, which is basically mimicking a native speaker.
Oh, yeah. Shadowing is great. It's like a vocal workout, You're training your mouth and brain to reproduce the rhythms and sounds of natural speech.
Kind of like how musicians practice scales, right? It's all about those fundamental techniques.
Exactly. And then they had this other exercise, role-playing specific situations, which I thought was super helpful.
Oh, for sure. Like, imagine practicing how you'd order food, ask for directions, or even just make small talk. It's like a dress rehearsal for real life.
Totally. And they emphasized visualization, too. Like, before you go into a situation, imagine yourself speaking clearly and confidently. It can seriously boost your confidence.
Okay, so in the podcast, they had a Q&A section, and Lisa from Germany asked about overcoming hesitation when speaking.
Right. And Emma suggested starting with low-pressure situations, like talking to yourself, practicing with a friend, that sort of thing. Basically desensitizing yourself to the fear of speaking up.
It's about getting those reps in, even if it's just casual conversation. And then Carlos from Mexico, he asked about forgetting words mid-sentence, which I'm sure we've all been there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And Emma was all about embracing creative solutions, use synonyms, describe the object, even use gestures if you have to. The point is to keep the conversation going.
It's like, don't let a little brain fart derail the whole train, right?
Exactly. It's about being resourceful and focusing on getting your message across, even if you don't have the perfect word at hand.
Okay, so out of all these tips and techniques, what really jumped out at you? What do you think is like the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
Honestly, it's that emphasis on action over perfection. They really hammered home the point that our brains learn best through making mistakes and adapting. It's about ditching that myth that fluency is all about perfect grammar and like sounding like a textbook.
Right. Like it's so freeing to realize that it's okay to make mistakes, to not be perfect.
Yeah.
It's actually essential for growth.
Totally. And James and Emma, they did a fantastic job of like debunking that myth. They were all about celebrating the messy, imperfect beauty of communication.
I love that. It's about shifting our mindset from fear to confidence and like finding the joy in just expressing ourselves. So What do you think? How can our listeners start putting these ideas into practice today?
Well, I think a great starting point would be to think about a specific situation where you'd love to speak English more confidently. And then try to visualize yourself actually doing it. Like using those techniques we discussed, chunking, thinking directly in English, embracing those imperfect sentences. How does it feel?
I love that. It's about taking those first steps, however small, and trusting the process, right?
Exactly. And remember, the more you speak, the more comfortable and confident you'll become. So let's ditch the overthinking and just start talking. It's crazy, right? This whole think less, speak more thing. It's like, it's not just about language.
Now you've got me thinking, where else does that come into play?
Well, think about it. Like anytime you're afraid of not being good enough, public speaking maybe, or even like sharing your art or music, something like that.
Ugh, yeah, I can see that. Totally get stuck in my head sometimes.
Exactly. And it's that fear, that overthinking that keeps us from actually doing the thing, right?
So how do we apply this think less, speak more idea to like other stuff beyond just language?
First, you got to notice when you're doing that negative self-talk, like, oh, what if I mess up? All that stuff.
Oh man, I'm the queen of negative self-talk, but like, how do you actually stop it?
It's tough, but instead of thinking about all the bad stuff that could happen, focus on what you want to happen. What's the message you want to get across?
So less fear, more action. I like that.
Exactly. Thinking about it isn't enough. You got to actually do the thing, even if it's scary.
Okay, so say someone wants to start a blog, but they keep putting it off. What's a good first step using this idea?
Don't think about the whole blog. Just write one post. Like, just get the words out there.
Oh, that's good. Break it down into smaller chunks.
Yep. Or someone who hates public speaking. Maybe volunteer for a tiny presentation at work, just to dip their toes in.
It's like building up that muscle, right? Just like with language.
Exactly. And even the pros, like even famous speakers, they still get nervous. It's about not letting those nerves run the show.
Yeah, it makes me feel a bit better, actually.
Remember in the podcast how they talked about practicing in low-pressure situations? That works for other stuff, too.
Give me some examples, like beyond just language.
Talking to yourself in the mirror can actually help. It sounds weird, but it gets you used to, like, forming the words, or, share your ideas with a friend you trust, someone who won't judge.
It's like creating a safe space to practice, mess up, and all that.
And remember, feedback isn't always bad. It can be like, hey, I like this idea, but maybe try this, helpful stuff.
Yeah, finding people who will support you no matter what. That's important.
Because the goal isn't to be perfect, it's to keep getting better. It's the journey,
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we, challenge ourselves to think less, speak more every day, like in regular life?
Think about the times you hold back. Like at work, maybe you don't share your ideas in meetings. Or, I don't know, maybe you don't speak up for what you believe in.
Oh, yeah. I've been there for sure. It's scary sometimes.
But imagine what could happen if you did speak up, even if you're not totally sure what you're going to say beforehand.
It's like trusting yourself in the moment.
And you don't always have to have the answer. Sometimes asking a question is even better.
Shows you're paying attention, right?
Exactly. And it can lead to really cool discussions. But what do you think stops people from speaking up more? Like, what's the biggest hurdle?
I think it's worrying about what other people will think. Like, will they think I'm dumb?
Yeah.
Or not good at my job.
That's so common, but honestly, most people are way nicer than we think.
Yeah, they're probably too worried about themselves to judge us that harshly. And even if someone disagrees, it doesn't mean I'm wrong. Yeah.
Exactly, just a different opinion. And different opinions are good. They can make conversations more interesting.
Okay, so how can we, get over that fear of judgment so we can speak up more?
One thing that helps is to think about what you're bringing to the table. Like, what special knowledge or experiences do you have? Stuff that other people might not.
Yeah, focusing on the good stuff instead of the fear.
And remember, your voice matters. Even if you don't think it's anything special, it is.
Because everyone's different. Everyone has something to offer.
So true. Okay, so for practical tips, one thing is to prepare beforehand. Like, if you know you're going to a meeting, jot down some ideas you want to share.
That's a good one, so you're not caught off guard.
And practice active listening. That means, really paying attention to what others are saying, asking questions. It makes it easier to jump in with your own thoughts.
So it's not just waiting for your turn to talk, it's being part of the conversation.
Yep. And don't be afraid to use humor. A little joke can make everyone feel more relaxed, including you.
Yeah. Make it fun. And even if you mess up, stumble over your words.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. Happens to all of us.
That's what makes us human, right?
Exactly. The important thing is to keep going. Don't let it stop you.
Because the more we practice, the easier it gets.
And the more we can, make a difference in the world.
So think less, speak more. That's the message.
Love it. And before we go to part 3, I want you to think about this. Where in your life do you want to think less, speak more? What's one tiny step you can take today to start doing that?
Yeah, that's a really good question to think about. It's where are we holding ourselves back? And how can we, break free from that?
Totally. It's all about recognizing those patterns, those beliefs that are limiting us, and then actively choosing to do something different.
It reminds me of that quote, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure.
Oh, I love that quote.
It's sometimes we're so scared of our own potential,
Absolutely. We put these limits on ourselves because of fear, but really, we're capable of so much more.
And sometimes it really is just about taking that first step, just speaking up, whether it's in English or, any area of life where you feel stuck.
Because often once you do that, it's that wasn't so bad.
Right. And then you start to gain momentum. You start to feel more confident.
It's like a snowball effect in a good way. The more you act, the more confident you become, and then you can achieve even more.
So if there's one thing I hope everyone takes away from this deep dive, it's that it's okay to be imperfect. Just start talking.
Yes, your voice matters. What you have to say is important. So don't be afraid to share it.
Don't wait for the perfect moment or until you feel 100% ready. Just go for it. You'll be surprised at what happens.
And remember, becoming fluent, becoming confident, it's a journey. It's not like you reach the end and you're done. It's about embracing the process, the ups and downs, and just keep learning and growing.
That's such a good reminder. Thank you so much for, sharing all of this with us today. I feel like I've learned so much.
Of course. It's been a pleasure chatting with you about all this.
And to all our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into confident speaking. We hope you found it helpful.
Remember, think less, speak more, and embrace the power of your voice.
And that's a wrap for today. Until next time, everyone. All right, so today we're going to dive deep into something I know a lot of you have been wanting to master, speaking English like a native speaker.
Yeah.
We've got some fantastic source material for this deep dive.
Absolutely.
A podcast episode that's just absolutely packed with tips. And we are here to extract the gold and help you apply it.
Yeah.
So forget dry grammar rules.
Yeah.
We're talking about the secret sauce,
Right.
the nuances that make someone truly fluent.
Absolutely.
To guide us through this, we have an expert
Oh, thank you.
in language acquisition and communication.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
You're going to break down the techniques, but more than that, you're going to help us understand the why behind them.
Yeah, that's what I love to do.
So before we jump in, let's talk about why this matters to you, the listener.
Okay.
Imagine yourself in a conversation with native speakers.
Mm-hmm.
Keeping up effortlessly understanding those lightning-fast jokes
Yeah.
and expressing yourself with total confidence. That's the power
Right.
of what we're about to uncover.
Yeah.
And this source material gets that.
Totally.
It dives into the common struggles we face as learners
Yeah.
and offers some really cool solutions.
I love that they do that.
Yeah.
What's so fascinating about this podcast episode is that it goes beyond just textbook English.
Yeah.
You know, it throws light on connected speech,
Oh, yeah.
which is basically how native speakers kind of smush words together. Think, what you doing? Instead of, what are you doing?
Right.
And it might seem like a small thing,
Yeah.
but mastering this can really make a difference in how natural you sound.
It's like the difference between reading sheet music
Mm-hmm.
and actually jamming out on an instrument, right?
Absolutely.
You need both the theory and the feel.
Yes, you need that feel.
Speaking of feel, let's talk pronunciation.
Okay.
This podcast brings up some challenges that might even surprise seasoned learners.
Right.
For instance, vowel length.
Uh-huh.
The difference between ship and sheep
Right.
is all in how long you hold that vowel sound.
Yeah.
Native speakers do this instinctively,
They do.
and it can be a real trip up if you're not attuned to it.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Vowel length has definitely gotten me into some awkward situations.
I bet.
The podcast also tackled the infamous the sound.
Oh, yes.
I know a lot of learners struggle with that one.
Of course, it's a tricky one,
For sure.
but the source material offers some neat tricks.
Oh, really?
Like they suggest placing your tongue between your teeth
Okay.
and gently blowing air out.
Yeah.
Have you tried that technique before?
I have. And it really does help with getting the sound just right.
It does.
But there's more to sound like a native than just nailing individual sounds right.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The podcast episode digs into the music of language,
Right.
intonation.
Yeah.
It's all about how the pitch of your voice can completely change the meaning of a sentence.
Right.
Remember the example they gave?
Uh-huh.
You're going
Yeah.
versus you're going.
Right.
It's the same two words, but delivered with different intonation. Yeah.
And boom, completely different meanings.
It's almost like a secret code
It is.
embedded in spoken language.
Totally.
Have you ever noticed how a native speaker's tone can completely shift the meaning of what they're saying?
All the time.
I know I have tons of stories about that.
Me too. Intonation is definitely powerful.
For sure.
And this podcast emphasizes that mastering it is key to sounding more engaging and expressive.
So true. Speaking of expressive,
Okay.
let's move on to vocabulary.
Right.
The podcast really hit on something that I think is so important.
Okay.
Using vocabulary that pops.
Yeah.
It's not just about knowing a ton of words, it's about using the right words
Mm-hmm.
in the right way.
Yes.
They talked about phrasal verbs,
Right.
idioms and collocations.
I love that.
Those expressions that native speakers sprinkle into their conversations effortlessly.
Absolutely.
It's like the difference between saying, I am happy
Yeah.
and I'm over the moon.
Exactly.
The podcast gave tons of these examples.
Which is super helpful for anyone who wants to sound more natural and interesting.
It's so helpful.
Okay, let's play a quick game.
All right, I love games.
Based on the podcast's examples,
Okay.
I'll give you a bland phrase,
Uh-huh.
and you translate it into a more vibrant, native-sounding equivalent.
Okay,
Ready?
I'm ready.
First up, I am very tired. How about I'm completely knackered?
Perfect.
Uh-huh.
See how much more color that adds.
Yeah.
It's not just about being understood, it's about expressing yourself
Mm,
in a way that resonates with native speakers.
absolutely. And that ties into the bigger picture of cultural nuances
Right.
embedded in the language.
Yeah.
It's about going beyond the literal meaning
Uh-huh.
and tapping into the way native speakers actually use the language.
Totally. It's like adding those finishing touches to a dish.
Yes.
You've got all the main ingredients, but it's the spices, the herbs, the little flourishes that
Yeah.
make it truly delicious.
Mhm.
And using these vibrant expressions does exactly that.
It spices up your English.
Absolutely. And the source material highlights how much fun this can be.
Yeah.
Language learning isn't just about memorizing rules.
Right.
It's about playing with the language, experimenting, and discovering these little gems.
Now, all of this is great,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a big hurdle that a lot of learners, myself included, face.
Yeah.
Thinking in English.
Oh, yeah.
It can be so hard to stop translating everything in your head.
I know, it's a tough one.
Right.
The podcast addresses this head on,
Okay, good.
encouraging listeners to shift towards thinking in English directly.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as intimidating as it sounds, though.
Okay.
They offered some really practical steps.
Like starting small, right?
Exactly.
Labeling objects around you in English,
Mm-hmm.
gradually building up to thinking in simple sentences.
Right.
And eventually you're thinking in full paragraphs, having entire conversations in your head,
Wow.
all in English.
That's the dream.
It is.
The podcast reminded us that immersion is key. Surround yourself with English as much as possible.
Yeah.
Whether it's through movies, music books, or even podcasts.
Like the one we're dissecting right now.
Exactly. The more you expose yourself to the language, the easier it becomes to start thinking in it naturally.
Speaking of podcasts, this one didn't shy away from the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Practicing with native speakers.
Oh, yeah.
I know that can be a nerve-wracking experience for a lot of people.
Of course.
But they offered some great tips.
What did they say?
They recommended language exchange apps, online communities, even just finding a language buddy to chat with.
I love that.
The key takeaway is that any practice is valuable,
Mm-hmm.
and mistakes are just part of the process.
Mistakes are how we learn, right?
They are. They're actually learning opportunities in disguise.
I like that.
The podcast encouraged listeners to embrace those stumbles
Uh-huh.
as stepping stones on the path to fluency.
Yeah.
It's about enjoying the journey and not beating yourself up over every little slip-up.
Totally. It's about having fun with the process and celebrating every little victory along the way.
So we've covered a lot of ground here,
We have.
from connected speech and pronunciation
Mhm.
to vocabulary, intonation, thinking in English, and the importance of practice.
It's a lot.
And what's great is that this podcast didn't just throw a bunch of theories at us.
Right.
It gave us actionable strategies that we can put into practice right away.
Yeah. It's like having a roadmap to fluency with clear directions and helpful signposts along the way.
Yeah.
It gives listeners the tools and encouragement they need to embark on this exciting journey of mastering English.
And what's particularly insightful is the podcast's emphasis on fluency, not being solely about speed
Yes.
or sounding exactly like a native speaker.
Right. It's about clarity,
Right.
confidence, and expressing yourself effectively.
And they made a point of reminding us that everyone has their own unique voice,
Absolutely.
their own accent,
Mm-hmm.
their own story to tell.
And embracing those individual qualities can actually enhance your communication rather than hinder it.
Absolutely. It's about finding that sweet spot where your personality shines through
Yeah.
while still being understood and engaging with others.
It's like adding your own signature style to a piece of music
Right.
while still staying true to the melody.
Exactly. And that's what makes language learning so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
It's as much a journey of self-discovery as it is about acquiring new skills.
I love that.
So to recap, this podcast episode provides a wealth of insights and practical tips for anyone who wants to improve their spoken English.
It does. We've explored the importance of connected speech,
Yeah.
mastered pronunciation challenges, spiced up our vocabulary,
Mm-hmm.
and learned how to play the music of language through intonation.
Mm-hmm.
We've also tackled the mental hurdle of thinking in English and discovered creative ways to practice with native speakers.
And perhaps most importantly, we've been reminded that fluency is a journey, not a destination. Embracing our unique voices can actually make our communication more powerful.
I agree.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling super inspired to put all these techniques into practice.
Me too. It's a great reminder that language learning is an ongoing adventure,
Mm-hmm.
and there's always something new to discover.
And for you, our listener, this deep dive has hopefully provided a solid foundation and a boost of motivation to continue on that path to fluency.
Absolutely. Remember, it's not about perfection.
Right.
It's about progress.
So embrace those mistakes, have fun with the language, and keep practicing.
Because with dedication and the right tools, anyone can unlock the secrets to speaking English like a native.
So well said.
Thank you.
Love that. You know, one thing that really struck me from this podcast episode
Yeah.
was the discussion about accents.
Oh, yeah.
It's something that I think a lot of learners get hung up on.
Totally. It's a common misconception
Yeah.
that you need to completely erase your accent
Right.
to be considered fluent.
Yeah.
The podcast guest actually made a really interesting point about that.
Yeah.
They suggested that focusing on clarity and pronunciation is more important than achieving a perfect native accent.
Which makes total sense.
Right.
It's about being understood and communicating effectively.
Exactly. And sometimes a slight accent can even add to the richness and uniqueness of your voice.
I agree.
Think about some of the most captivating speakers you've heard.
Yeah.
They often have a touch of an accent that makes them even more memorable.
It's like adding a dash of spice to a dish.
Yeah.
Or unique flavor.
It makes it stand out.
Makes it stand out from the crowd.
Precisely. And it can make your communication more engaging and authentic.
So as you continue on your journey towards fluency, I want you to consider this.
Okay.
How can you embrace your own unique voice and accent while still striving for clarity and confidence in your spoken English?
That's a good question.
It's something to ponder as you keep exploring the fascinating world of language and communication.
It's a great reminder that true fluency goes beyond simply mimicking others.
Yeah.
It's about finding your own voice within the language.
And that's a really empowering message to take away from this deep dive.
It is.
So keep practicing, keep exploring,
Yes.
and keep discovering the joy of speaking English in your own unique way.
Because ultimately, that's what will make your communication truly shine.
And that's a wrap on another deep dive.
Wow.
We hope you found these insights valuable and feel inspired to keep pushing forward on your language learning journey.
Yeah.
Until next time. As we wrap up this deep dive, I can't help but think about how much this podcast episode resonated with my own language learning journey.
It's so easy to get caught up in the pursuit of perfection.
Right.
Especially when it comes to spoken English.
It's like we're constantly striving to sound exactly like a native speaker.
Yeah.
Erasing any trace of our own accent or background.
But what this podcast episode reminds us is that our individual voices are actually our strengths.
They're what make us unique and memorable as speakers.
Except, think about it.
Yeah.
How boring would it be
Right.
if everyone sounded exactly the same?
It would be like listening to a choir
Yeah.
where everyone's saying the exact same note
Right.
in the exact same way.
There'd be no harmony, no texture, no individuality.
And that's what's so beautiful about language.
It is.
It's a tapestry woven from countless threads.
Yeah.
Each one representing a different voice.
A different experience.
A different perspective.
And when we embrace those differences, we create a richer, more vibrant communication landscape.
Absolutely. So to our listener,
Okay.
as you continue honing your spoken English,
Yes.
remember to celebrate the unique qualities of your own voice.
Let your personality shine through.
Yes.
And don't be afraid to let a little bit of your background color your speech.
Because those are the things that make you you. And ultimately, that's what will make your communication truly authentic and engaging.
And on that note, we're signing off.
Okay.
We hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought and a renewed sense of confidence in your language learning journey.
Keep practicing, keep exploring,
Yes.
and most importantly, keep having fun with it.
Until next time, happy speaking.